We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. This is the Monday show, and usually I'm on here by myself, basically spouting off to the world and telling the world what I think of it. And today is a little bit different. Today I'm going to have a guest. Every now and then I have a guest, and today I'm going to be joined by Meadow Linn, and she is the author of the Mystic Cookbook and has a website called Savor the Day. And we're going to talk about food. Everybody loves food, right? I mean, I think we can all agree upon probably about three things, maybe two, in life that we all like. Food is one. The other might be kittens or puppies, and the third might be kids. Not everybody agrees on kids, though. And the kitten and puppy camp is split. Some kitten lovers are not puppy lovers, and vice versa. However, food is the universal thread that runs through all of our lives, and each of us has a very unique and individual experience with food. And the thing that I've been trying to do lately on the show is to bring people on that give us tools with which we can live our lives and actually have meaningful experiences in the midst of incredible pressure and chaos and change, which is what everybody seems to be going through at a very rapid rate. So tools for living, tools for healing, and tools for eating, because eating seems to be at the core of everything. What we put in our bodies matters. How it's prepared matters. What it smells like matters. What it looks like matters. It all matters. Food is matter, right? So what I want to do now is I want to bring Meadow on, and we're going to talk about food, and we're going to talk about her book, The Mystic Cookbook, and hopefully a whole lot more. Meadow, hello there.
Hi, Robert.
How are you?
It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, great. It's great to have you.
It was a great introduction. You pretty much covered everything I was going to say.
I guess we can just say goodbye now and wish each other well then. But I think we owe it to each other to find out just a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and what you put together with your book.
Well, I look forward to it.
Okay. Well, let's talk. And I know you've probably done a lot of radio already. We'll continue to do radio and other interviews. And in some ways, we can't talk about you without talking about your mother. And I'm sure you probably are like, you love your mom. But you're like, hey, I've got my own life. I've got my own book. But let's just tell people a little bit about, because your mom is a really important role in your life. She was a co-author with the book. and because of her touring and speaking engagements, you really learned a lot about different cultures as you traveled around the world and did a lot of cooking for these events. Let's just talk a little bit about your mom for a second. Give people some background on who she is. And then, and for me, what I always find interesting is what it's like to be the child of somebody who is either famous or has some kind of cultural impact, and how that shaped your life and your life decisions. So let's start there with your mom, and then let's move into you. Okay?
Okay. So, well, to start, for those who aren't familiar with my mom's work, my mom is Denise Linn, and she has done extensive healing work for the past 40 or so years, which actually started when she was 17 years old. She was shot by kind of a crazed, deranged gunman and lost many organs in her body, and she was pronounced dead. And as a result, she had a near-death experience, the typical story you hear of seeing the light and that cord pulling you. And she heard a voice that said, "Your time is not over." And so she came back to her body, but her body was very, very damaged. And she'd grown up with very scientific parents. They were atheists. I think they even belonged to the Atheist Society. If you couldn't prove it or see it, it didn't exist. But she'd had this very spiritual experience, and her body was damaged. She went through many years of challenges because of the physical and emotional challenges that come with being shot and pronounced dead, and then the physical challenges of losing a number of organs. And so from that, it set her on this spiritual journey, this spiritual path, and she ended up in a Zen Buddhist monastery for 2.5 years. She studied with Hawaii Takato, who ended up bringing Reiki to the Western world. She's been adopted by a Maori tribe in New Zealand, and we ate on the marae when I was just a young kid. We were welcomed into the tribe as family. She's studied with the Aborigines in Australia, and it continued. And then she has been, for the past 40 or so years, as I said, sharing this with the world. She lectures internationally, and she's started a couple different training institutes, and has written a number of books. And this is the second book that we've collaborated on together. The first was called Quest, about Native American vision quests. We are of Native American heritage, my mom and I. And then now, more recently, we have collaborated on this, the Mystic Cookbook, that blends my passion for food with her background in spirituality.
Wonderful.
So I didn't know if that was kind of the summary in a nutshell. I'm happy to elaborate more if you need more.
No. I thought you did a great job with that. So you travel around with your mom. What was it like for you to, at some point, wake up and say, something is really interesting is going on here. My life isn't like my friends' lives. And how did you cope with that socially as you kind of became more aware and conscious of what was going on?
I tried really hard to be like all the other kids, to be normal, quote unquote normal. I think it's one of those things that naturally children, in a lot of ways, you often, I was not a very rebellious teenager, but I rebelled in my own way by shopping at the Gap and matching my T-shirts to my socks and wanting to go to the most academic school and fit in with the most kind of old money academic families in my town and be associated with them. So I really worked hard at kind of shunning a lot of the spirituality that I had grown up with. And, I didn't push it deep down, but definitely enough that I wanted to fit in more with the other students. And it's really been more in my adult years that I have returned to my roots, if you will, to see the power that our thoughts have on our life, the power that not just actions, but what we think and how we feel affects every day. And so it's been kind of fun to see my life come full circle in that way.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the Vision Quest stuff. That sounds pretty interesting. How often do you get into the Vision Quest work, and what sort of practices do you attend to while you're doing this?
Well, what was interesting with the Vision Quest is I went on my first Vision Quest when I was 13 years old, and it was a bit of a challenge at 13 to sit in a solitary circle in the woods. now I think about, and my mom looks back on it, she probably now wouldn't let me wander off into the woods on my own.
Right.
But but sometimes we become more protective in our later years. But it was challenging, but it was also was an important experience and a rite of passage in some ways. And what was especially interesting for me, I think, thinking about this progression, as you were saying, in my life of what it's like to grow up with somebody who's so involved in mind, body, spirit, and spirituality, is that I was able to kind of blend that my childhood in kind of a more mainstream way with the Vision Quest, because as I said, I did my first one when I was 13, but in my early 20s, I was a teacher. I taught French at a boarding school in Maine. And one of my duties, in addition to teaching French, was to run the solo program. And a solo is very much like a Vision Quest. It's the word that the Outward Bound program uses, and some school programs that do them as well use solo instead of Vision Quest. I think for teenagers, it takes away that pressure of having to find a vision and making it this mystical experience and making it one more about the experience of being solitary, being in nature, reflecting, being alone with your thoughts, which for most teenagers is something, especially in this day and age, we don't get to do very often. There's even when you're alone, you're not alone. There's the computer, there's social media, there's your iPhone, your iPad, your iPod, anything that starts with I. We're constantly bombarded with information and people, and we're rarely just allowed to be calm and sit. So it was actually this wonderful experience for me to pull and call from what I had done as a child and blend it in a more mainstream way. And as a result of those experiences, my mom and I wrote this book together and blended in some of the stories from friends of mine who had also done solos when I was at a similar boarding school program, and then with her background and, my background as well in the more kind of spiritual side of the Native American practice of doing Vision Quests.
So did that include sweat lodges at any point along the way?
It did, not in the solos that we did with the high school students, but as I was growing up, I took part in a number of sweat lodges. And then I came to a point where I realized that it wasn't for me. The heat was just too unbearable, the claustrophobic. So I became, at a very young age when my mom was leading sweat lodges, I became the doorkeeper. And I did that job with fervor. It's this person who sits on the outside, and you sit there kind of stoically, sometimes for hours. It's not necessarily that warm either. It's very hot inside for those inside. And I would just sit there, and I was probably 8, 9 years old, and I would sit there, and you open the door if anybody needs to come out, or if there is a break between. Some sweat lodges are done in a cycle of 4, one for each element, and there's a break in between air, water, fire, and earth, and you open the door, and you are that gatekeeper. So that was my job as a young child. But we don't do sweat lodges anymore, but it was a wonderful experience in some ways for me as a child.
You figured out what you didn't like and what you would be good at, which would be letting people in and out and letting the elements in. So that's instructive in and of itself. Well, let's talk about food. Let's get into this book. And the inspiration of the book obviously came from both you and your mother, and wanting to put forth kind of a spiritual vision of food. What can you describe for people that aren't aware of the book or your work, what a spiritual vision of food is?
Well, I guess the best way to start with that is to take a step back. And for my entire life, I have been passionate about eating well, cooking, anything that has to do with food. My first dish I ever created, I was about 3 years old. I couldn't even reach the cabinet, so I had to drag a chair from the dining room into the kitchen and crawl up into the cupboard and pull out things that I could barely reach, and I created a dish called Tahini Balls, which perhaps isn't the best name for it, but I mixed peanut butter and tahini sesame paste with some honey and cocoa powder, and then I made them into little balls and rolled them in coconut, and I walked around with them on a plate, kind of cocktail style, and passed them out to my parents. So food has been a really important part of my life from such a young age. My mom even says that when I was about 15 months old, my parents liked to sit on the floor, eat by the fire. They're a little more earthy, a little more casual, and I would insist that we sat at the table at 15 months old. I mean, I'm just barely, I'm still a baby, that we sat at the table with the full place setting and knife, fork, maybe even 2 forks, water glass. I was too young for a wine glass in those days. But so I started that way as a very young child, and it has carried with me throughout my life. And when I was 18, there was the summer after I graduated high school, I started catering for my mom's retreats. She has led for many years intensive certification retreats. And I did the cooking for all of the guests at our ranch. And throughout the years of doing the cooking, we started to see that the people who came to these seminars had deep, deep shifts and transformations. Some of it, of course, is attributed to the interpersonal work that they were doing in the course. They were doing lots of inner journeys and meditation and personal growth. But a lot of it came from meal times because of the way that we approached our meals. And one was, I love cooking. So I would, at the time I worked with another chef, we'd grab the wooden spoons, we'd crank up the music, we'd pretend our spoons were microphones, and we would dance and sing our way across the kitchen, and we would stir each soup and sauce with such glee, and as we would chop in rhythm to the music. We had so much fun. And we realized that really infused the food. And then when we served the food, we would, now at our ranch here in California, we have maybe 20 sets of dishes. It seems a little crazy, but they're all different colors, different patterns. So each place setting we set to correspond with the energy of the meal. Sometimes it's a theme meal. If it's Mexican, we might have really brightly colored plates and napkins. Maybe we'll set a buffet table with piñatas and woven brightly colored fabrics. And maybe it's a Japanese meal, so we have some black plates that are, I think, a triangle or a rectangle, and it might be very peaceful, and we might listen to Japanese flute music while we eat. And we make every meal a celebration, and it's amazing. People always say, I've never eaten so much or so well, but nobody gains weight for the most part because they're eating in a joyful, fun manner, that they're not just shoveling things down in front of the television or feeling stressed. It's a very leisurely time where we really enjoy the food, but also the community that we're creating as well.
It's really funny that you mentioned the plate thing. I just went from going from a round black plate to a square white plate, and I've watched as the food sort of gets put on this square white plate. It looks different. It feels different. My relationship to that food is different just based on the plate it's on. It's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? And it has to do with so many different things, that food is not just about the calories that we need to eat to fuel our bodies to continue. It is a very sensual experience. And I mean sensual in the term of the word that it's all of your senses. You smell the food, you feel the food, you feel how it feels on the fork, you feel it in your mouth, you feel it as you chew it. It's the way that it looks, the colors, the textures. Did I get all the senses? It's the way it sounds. The way it sounds when you're eating. All of the senses are heightened, and the way that it looks really affects how we perceive it. And like you said, the shape of the plate makes a difference, and the color, too, makes a big difference. For instance, red is an appetite stimulant. You might notice that a lot of chain restaurants and even chain stores, Target, McDonald's, they use a lot of red because it makes you hungry. You'll want to eat more. Your experience of that meal would be very different than if it were on a blue or a green plate, which is a calming, soothing, often appetite suppressant. So you would notice that difference with the white and the black as well, too, that the white would kind of illuminate the food, whereas the black would frame it more, and that would make a difference in your experience of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it feels like just and I just switched to these plates about 2 weeks ago, but it feels like the black plates actually kind of absorb the color and the texture. It kind of blends in more with the plate, whereas with the white plate, I mean, it seems so obvious, but until you make the shift, and experience it, it's like, wow, this food is really jumping off the plate. I care about where it's actually going on the plate. If I care about where it's going on the plate, I may as well care about what's going on the plate as well and create something nice. So it sets up a whole series of relationships just based on what it looks like on the plate. It's fascinating stuff. Where do you weigh in on raw food, vegetarianism, veganism? There seems to be very strong elements in the sort of being conscious and aware that people must eschew eating animal products like meat if they want to attain a certain level of consciousness and awareness. And yet at the same time, I found some of the most aggressive and judgmental people when it comes to food on that side of the ledger sheet, where if you don't eat it a certain way or a particular way, well, you're not really setting an example for the rest of the world. There's a lot of pressure in that community at times to be vegan or raw or vegetarian. Where do you weigh in on that?
That's a wonderful question. And for me, I believe strongly that there's not one way of eating that works for everybody. Each person needs to find the diet that works the best for them, the one that makes your heart sing and your soul soar. And so many people, I do think, get whatever it is, whether it's no animal products, no gluten, and I am unfortunately not eating gluten at the moment because it seems to work better for my body. But, whether it's no gluten, no animal products, no sugar, whatever I'm all tongue-tied, whatever the specific diet is, it can tend to be limiting. When you get very set, in my view, get set in this is the right way to eat and become righteous or judgmental about it, it limits yourself, in my view. It puts walls around who you can become and who you will allow others to be. That I believe that it's very important to love what you eat and eat what you love. So if you believe that the best way to eat is a purely plant-based diet, I think that will be very healthy for that person if that's what you really believe. But also I encourage people because sometimes diet can become like a religion. And I think it's very important to be willing to be open to everybody finding their own path and what works best for them, whether it's eating animal products or not eating animal products, whether it's eating occasional sugary treats or whether it's only eating celery, whatever it is. So I feel passionate about that everybody needs to find their own way.
Right. Absolutely. So you've eschewed gluten from your diet. I have as well. It was about a year and a half ago, and I was absolutely sick every day for various reasons, had a very challenging relationship with food, and I just really felt like I was allergic to food. And then I realized that on almost every meal, I was having something that was gluten-based, and I decided to stop eating wheat products and gluten products. My life, my health took off as a result of that. I'm wondering, what was the turning point for you, and what's your personal relationship with being gluten-free now?
I wish I'd had a huge turning point like that. It would make it easier in some ways. A lot of gluten sensitivity tends to be genetic, and it runs in families. And my dad had kind of an awakening moment like you did, had gotten tested and cut gluten and dairy. He found a sensitivity to casein as well, the protein in dairy, and cut them both out of his life and had dramatic changes. And because food is my passion and I've always prided myself on being able to eat anything, anytime, anywhere, it was really my identity, was being very flexible in my diet. But I finally went ahead and got tested and discovered that I also had the sensitivity. So I started as kind of a trial run. I would do it for a while and see, and thought that perhaps, even though I thought I was asymptomatic, perhaps I would discover that I felt a million times better. Unfortunately, that moment has not come. It's been 2 years, but I did did by accident get some gluten this summer that really did made it apparent to me.
Concrete, yeah.
Yes, it made it apparent to me that actually, for me, not eating the gluten at this time is the best situation for me. And I'm curious to see how things will change. A lot of the gluten challenges we're having in our society now are because of the over-hybridization of the wheat. But, health fads, I don't necessarily want to call it a fad, but they come and go. Sometimes, everybody's not eating one thing or everybody's eating something else. And for so many of us, we have found that cutting gluten out of our diet has made a big difference. And I'm curious to see how that will project into the future. And I was actually raised more or less gluten-free. As a child, my mom perhaps was a bit on the forefront of health and nutrition. I was raised gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and mostly meat-free, too. It wasn't until I was a little bit older that I started experimenting with all of those delicious things and moving into. So I had a very healthy foundation as a child.
Well, let's talk about your book, and let's get into it a little bit. You talk about this whole notion of spiritual invocation and bringing in other elements, deities, fairies, inviting them into your cooking and dining experience. Where did the idea for those sorts of things come from when you decided that you wanted to put this together and make this not just a cookbook, but really kind of a book that includes spiritual practices as well?
We've been calling it actually a cookbook for your life in a lot of ways, that it does include a number of my original recipes. But as you said, there is a lot more. In the Mystic Cookbook, there's information about food, but there are also a lot of suggestions and activities and things that you can do to deepen your spiritual connection to food, and then also have a lot of fun with it. As you mentioned, we have a suggestion for creating a fairy dinner. You invite the fairies to your table, and it's a wonderful one you can do with children. I mean, it might seem a little silly, but it can be so much fun too. And believe it or not, if you put out the call and you invite those fairies to your table, they will come. And especially when you have children that have that veil open between the worlds, they really can latch onto it in a lot of ways and have a really fun time with it. But also, I saw a fairy or an angel, I guess, when I was a child. And then, for years after, oh, no, I couldn't possibly have seen that. I'm normal, but that's when that window is open. So it's a wonderful activity that you can do. But as you said, the book offers a number of tips, suggestions, and activities on ways that you really can enhance your life by the way that you approach food. Our relationship with food, because it is something that we have to do, and everybody in the world does it, is so important. And the way that we choose what we eat and the way that we eat it often has greater impact on our life than simply the calories or the micronutrients or whatever it is that we're taking into our body. It has a much deeper impact. So we offer a lot of activities, tips, suggestions, as I said, on ways that you can increase that experience to make it more meaningful and powerful in your life.
Some people, most people generally have a relationship with food, which is I'm hungry, I see it, I want it, I eat it, and then that's the experience. But there are some people that have very challenging relationships with food in terms of actually getting to that point where they will actually eat. And if they eat, then there's another challenging piece of, well, will I keep this down? And then there's a whole series of ramifications about those choices in and of themselves. There are some people that have real eating disorders. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how a book like this might begin to help people that have a really challenged relationship with food.
And unfortunately, in this country, it starts very early. Our relationship with food, starting from childhood, is challenging in so many ways. They did a study at the University of Pennsylvania where they showed a picture of chocolate cake to a group of French women, and they asked them to describe it using one word. for the most part, the French women said celebration. In France, food is about community. It's about conviviality, about joining together and sharing this kind of edible art, if you will. And there are other factors too, but you're probably familiar with the French paradox. The French, on average, die of heart attacks about the same rate as Americans. They're equally healthy, if not more so. Some of it has to do with smaller portion size, and they don't, they walk a lot more. When I lived in Paris, I lived on the 6th floor walk-up. Every time I needed to do anything or go anywhere, I had to walk up and down 6 flights of stairs. But so food there, naturally people have a different relationship with it. It's not just, as I said before, this idea of sustenance and fuel. The study at the University of Pennsylvania, then they showed the picture of the chocolate cake to a group of American women. And can you guess what they said, Robert?
Fat.
Yeah, guilt.
Guilt.
That we have this relationship, which is similar to fat, this relationship with food that there are good foods and there are bad foods. Where, from a spiritual point of view, it's neutral. Everything is made up of energy. It's not good, it's not bad. And of course, from a nutritional point of view, there are things that are better for us and things that are not as good for us. But we are constantly assign these words or feelings or emotions to food that really don't always have much to do with the food itself. This is good, this is bad, but we'll still eat the bad things, but we do so feeling very guilty. And the challenge is that when we are guilty or when we are stressed, we actually end up eating that guilt. We eat that stress. So not only are you eating something that might not be that healthy, you're actually eating all those bad emotions as well. So it kind of gets you twofold. It gets you both physically and spiritually.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So there are a lot of things that we can do to enhance the energy and vibration of our food, which are mentioned in the book. And then there are things that you can do to work through your beliefs and associations with certain foods. So they're kind of the concrete level of what you're actually eating, and then the bigger ideas and emotions connected with those foods.
So you have strategies in the book for people to kind of realign their relationship with food. Yes,
in a number of different modalities. And we use the book as kind of what we call a mystic chef apprenticeship, that there are a number of, as you said, strategies, activities that you can follow to become kind of this idea of a mystic chef, someone who employs all these greater forces into their cooking. But you can do just teeny tiny things that can change your relationship with food and your experience of it, and just make it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The fun part is key. Are there any unsung heroes in the food world for you? And I'm not talking about like individuals. I'm talking about either fruits or vegetables or pieces of meat or grains that you really resonate with and think that more people should know about them?
For me, it's really about variety. I love having very different foods to eat and different things to try. And actually, it was a challenge for me writing down the recipes and testing them for the cookbook, because I am somebody who likes to eat and cook different things all the time. I always like things really different. And it was a discipline for me to sit down and cook again and cook again and cook again, the same things over and over, to test them to make sure that the recipes in the book were well written and something that I was able and willing to share with the world. So that was a challenge. And as far as fruits and vegetables and meats and things, I love them all. It's hard to say which one I would say this is the one that you have to eat. And of course, there's things now, I was thinking about it yesterday, like kale. Who ate kale 10 years ago? And now everybody's eating kale. So it's the one that people constantly talk about. And it is, in some ways, an unsung hero. But I was wondering, what's going to be the next kale? It always seems to be there's something that is everybody's favorite in that moment, a kind of a collective vegetable, if you will.
It does happen. Like prior to kale, I think it might have been Brussels sprouts.
I love Brussels sprouts.
It is a comeback, Brussels. And you're on the Central Coast of California, so you're right by Brussels sprout Central there, aren't you?
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of them. I was at the farmer's market on Saturday, and there were big bins of them. They are one of my favorites. And there's actually an excellent Brussels sprouts recipe in the Mystic Cookbook. I cut them in half and caramelized them in the oven, which means just cook them on really high with a little bit of olive oil and some red peppers and pecans, and they are so good.
I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. Okay. I'm throwing down that the next collective vegetable is the artichoke. I'm going with the artichoke.
Well, it's another good Central Coast vegetable, so I'll hold you to that. We'll see what happens in 5 years if it's artichoke is the one that everyone's touting.
When I was a kid, my parents had this fetish for French fried artichoke hearts, and we would drive down to just past Santa Cruz, and we would stop at a roadside vegetable stand where they would deep fry these artichoke hearts, and it became almost like in some ways almost like a religious quest of sorts. And that's a whole other aspect of food, right? I mean, you will actually get in your car and you'll go somewhere, and it becomes more than just food. It's like you're actually going to a place where you're going to have an experience or a quasi-religious experience. Do you talk about this in the book as well, like journeying out to go to a special place to have a special meal or anything like that?
We don't have anything specifically about that in the book, but I do think it's changed a lot in our world now, where that is really considered an activity, a cultural activity. Now there's food trucks. And there's whole television programs devoted to food trucks, and there are apps on your phone that will show you where the food truck in your town is where, and people make this journey, this outing. And I do think it is a very important part of our changing food scene, that food is so much more than just simple fuel. I was an elementary school teacher for a number of years, and it was amazing to me to hear my students talking before class. They weren't always talking about the latest Hannah Montana that they'd seen. Some of them were, but others were talking about their favorite Food Network programs and what they'd seen on the Food Network the night before, and their favorite chefs and their favorite dishes. And I always thought it's so amazing to see how our culture is changing, and that food it's this big thing. It's our entertainment, it's our fuel, but it is like a spiritual practice in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, my kid, he's very into the Food Network, and one of his favorite shows is Chopped. He loves Chopped.
Oh, I love that one too.
That's great stuff. Let's just quickly talk about the state of food right now. One of the things that we're having to deal with is this march towards more synthetic hybridization of foods. We mentioned that briefly about wheat, but we're seeing the whole GMO issue become kind of a big deal around the world. Poland just decided that they don't want any GMOs in their agriculture. Here in this country, with Monsanto having such a large seat at the table with the current administration, that's been very difficult to pull off. And even in a place like California, where people are theoretically conscious and want good food, there was a proposition that was voted down for listing GMOs in food. Can you talk a little bit about GMOs? And I mean, I think it's important to eat organic food, and I'd love to have your take on that, and in fact, maybe why it's important to even grow your own food.
And you struck on another one of my passions here. I am passionate about the label it GMO proposition we had here in California. I begrudgingly took down my yard sign only recently because I couldn't quite handle the fact that it had lost. And to me, it's pardon?
It was shocking.
It is, because really, and it's big money that paid to scare people that it was going to cost them a lot more. And that's where, voters vote, is with their wallet in so many ways. because really the initiative that we had here in California was about labeling. It's only about letting people know what is in your food. We all should be able to know what we're eating. And I do find GMOs, and I will try to keep this brief because I could talk for a long time, but I find it frightening. It is not food in its traditional sense, the way that food was meant to be. Plants grow in a certain way, and they're supposed to be that way. They're not supposed to have genes altered and changed. And actually, the final chapter of the Mystic Cookbook, we touch a little bit on GMOs and organic produce and eating locally. And one very interesting thing about GMOs is when they do the genetic modification, often what they are doing is adding a new protein or suppressing a protein that already exists in the food. And sometimes these proteins come from other plants, sometimes from animals even. And what an allergic reaction is our body reacting to a protein in a food that it can't tolerate. And the interesting thing is in the past 20 years, since GMOs have been in the marketplace, I don't have the exact statistics in my head right now, but the amount of allergies has dramatically increased. And I think it's even like 1,000% increase in children being rushed to the emergency room for severe allergies. And there's actually a fascinating TED Talk by a woman named Robin O'Brien who writes about and talks about in this TED Talk about the allergies and the connection to GMOs. She was a very kind of normal, she described normal business mom who fed her kids blue yogurt in a little like squeezy thing, and she hadn't really thought much about nutrition until one day her child nearly died from a severe reaction to some eggs and the blue yogurt that she'd fed the child, and that it started her on this path. That it is pretty scary that not only are we eating food that we don't know what's in it, but it's actually potentially creating some very serious health risks. And as I said, I want to try to keep this short because I want to keep this more on the lighter notes of all of the fabulous things that food can do for us and that we can do with our food. But I do feel very passionately about GMOs. Well, about not having GMOs.
Right, sure. And I think that your passion and concern is shared by the people that listen to this program. So you're preaching to the choir, and you can talk as long as you want about it. Trust me on that. So what's next for you? When are you going to get your own Food Network show, Meadow?
I don't know. That would be fun.
I think the Food Network needs you and your mom. That's what I think.
Oh, well, that would be a joy. It would be a fun offshoot, I suppose.
I think it could be a very interesting idea, for sure. So are you on tour? Are you touring for the book and doing any speaking appearances anywhere?
There are a few on the docket at this moment. The most recent, I'm getting all tongue-tied. The one coming up the soonest is March 16th and 17th. I will be speaking in San Jose at the I Can Do It Ignite that's sponsored by Hay House. So that's an exciting event for any of your listeners who have been to an I Can Do It. This is a fun one. It is a new format where each of the speakers has 20 minutes. So everybody sits in one big assembly hall, and you get kind of these dynamic talks, 20 minutes, one after the other, and you get to see all of the speakers. So that should be a very fun event.
Yeah, that sounds great. We had Nia Nell, who is also on Hay House, and she did the Ignite New York, and she was on the show a few months back. It was absolutely delightful. Where can people find your book? Amazon, I'm sure, is a go-to place for it?
It is, yes. The Mystic Cookbook is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, hayhouse.com, of course, the publisher, and hopefully from local booksellers as well. We like to support our local retailers whenever possible.
Absolutely. And you have your own blog and websites called Savor the Day, and people can find recipes and all kinds of things that you're doing and experiencing on that website, right?
Yes, it's Savor the Day, and that's Savor, the American spelling, SAVOR. That is my blog. I post every 2 weeks. There's usually a little story about my life and then a recipe that's connected to the story. And then we also have a website dedicated solely to the Mystic Cookbook, and that is called themysticcookbook.com. And that one has some recipes specifically from the book, as well as some excerpts and some other articles pertaining to the book itself.
Okay, well, there we go. Meadow, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and getting to talk about food, one of the things that I love to explore in my own life. And welcome back anytime. And next time you have another book or when you hit the Food Network and start your reality show, bring you back on here. How's that sound?
Great. Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay. Thank you, Meadow. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. That was Meadow Linn, the author of the Mystic Cookbook and the writer and blogger of Savor the Day, her own website, of course, mysticcookbook.com. That was a great interview, and I really enjoyed her passion and perspective on food, which is vitally important. It's all the foundation. It's all working with the foundational stuff, what you put in your body, how it gets there, and what it does once it's in you is one of the most important things that we can do. And unfortunately, we touched on that just a little bit towards the end of the interview. That is being obstructed, and it's being altered and mutated by genetically modified organisms and other agents in our environment. So it's really important for all of us to be able to have a natural and organic and structured relationship with our food. And you know, what's crazy is, it's like, you know, organic has become, and I've talked about this before, organic has become this really big buzzword, right? It's been a really, you know, organic. You know, organic just used to be food. I mean, it just used to be how people ate. That's all it really was. It was just, we just ate food, and there wasn't any difference between organic and inorganic or organic and non-GMO. It was just food. And over time, unfortunately, we've had to latch onto it as a label. And now what we're doing is we're paying a price to just eat food. It's almost like extortion in some ways. That's what it is. It's extortion. It's dietary extortion. Here, if you want to eat just food, you're going to have to pay a wicked price for it. Or you can pay less, and you know, you can have this over here. It's not as good for you, but we'll give you a discount. So there we go. Meadow Linn, author of the Mystic Cookbook. Thank you very much again for coming on the show. We have about 12 minutes left here, and I just want to say congratulations to my San Francisco 49ers. Pulled it off down in Atlanta after being down by 17 points, and I know all of you are very in tune with my relationship with the 49ers. It's only this year. I had to drop them for 7 years, and I got to tell you, this last game was kind of a vindication because the defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons used to be the head coach for the 49ers, and he was terrible. And he basically ruined about 5 years worth of my football watching experience, 4 + 2 with Mike Singletary. And it's on that guy. That guy's lost. He's going home. So thank you very much, 49ers. It's going to be an interesting game. It's going to be the Niners and Jim Harbaugh versus the Ravens and John Harbaugh. So we have, of course, it's not quite twins, but it's close. It's Gemini. It's Jupiter and Gemini, and we're seeing Remus and Romulus, I suppose, of the NFL. Never happened before. May never happen again unless, of course, these two teams somehow manage to find their way back there in the next few years. It's pretty rare, but it could happen. And it's going to be interesting because on the Baltimore side, you have Ray Lewis, and Ray Lewis was found guilty of murder. And he, of course, routed his buddies out who did some time, did a couple bids. And Ray just goes on and on about God now. It's all he talks about. God. God is great. God is great. God is a plan. You can do anything, man, if you align yourself with God's will. You know, I think he's right. I think Ray is right. And I you know, it's like I want to embrace that message with him. But I also know, you know, that Ray has got some skeletons in the past. Now, here's the deal. Because it's a very interesting contrast between Ray Lewis and Lance Armstrong. Okay, very interesting contrast. Ray Lewis was involved in the death of 2 people. And like I said on Friday's show, I don't think Lance Armstrong killed anybody. Not even close. He may have killed some careers, but he never killed anybody. And yet, Ray Lewis is not only allowed to play pro football, he is lionized for his leadership, for his intensity, for his greatness. Nobody ever really calls into question, in some ways, what happened to him in the last time the Baltimore Ravens were in the Super Bowl, which was the year 2000 down in Atlanta, where Ray Lewis and two of his friends in the early morning, the day after the Super Bowl, found two young men on the street, got into a scuffle with them, and wound up stabbing them to death. Stabbing them to death. Think about that. And that's a pretty intense way to go. Because you can get stabbed and you can come through it, but being stabbed to death, well, that's multiple stab wounds. Anyway, there was a trial, and Ray basically outed the guys who were in his car as the guys that did it, and he was the guy that said, hey, you better stop doing it. So they wound up doing some time, brief, maybe a year at most. Ray did no time. He was on probation. And I suppose in the grand scheme of things, in the cosmos here, where we have perhaps a Christian God that dwells at the center, that even though Ray Lewis has committed a sin, accessory to murder, that he has been forgiven. I mean, we could go down that path. I really don't have a problem with it, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't, because I think that there is a tremendous force for forgiveness and reconciliation and love. I've experienced it in my own life. But sometimes there's penance that needs to take place. And I've also experienced that too. I couldn't get necessarily to my own relationship around forgiveness if I had not gone through certain stages of penance. And then eventually the light of grace came back into my life, and it was all good. But there were times where it was not. And so I don't know anything about Ray Lewis in terms of his personal journey. I don't know what he's gone through. I don't know what type of penance he's made. But I do know this. I think if he could back off the God piece a little bit, it'd make me, and it's not that I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable with what happened and where he is with it. It almost feels to me like he's overcompensating on some level. That's what it feels like. And I watched him yesterday with Sal Paolantonio, and Sal Paolantonio looked uncomfortable. He just did. He looked uncomfortable with Ray Lewis going on and on and on about this. Anyway, so Niners, Ravens, brother versus brother, East Coast versus West Coast, Ray Lewis versus Patrick Willis, Frank Gore versus Ray Rice, Colin Kaepernick versus Joe Flacco. Should be a good one. Trust me on this. It'll be a good Super Bowl. People will not be disappointed. These two teams they play hard, they have a lot of heart, and it'll be in New Orleans, and Beyonce will be there, and we can do a show in that sometime. And I'm pretty sure that Ez Devlin, the woman who did the Olympics, the Summer Olympics in London, the final scenes, the closing ceremonies, and the closing ceremonies for the Paralympics, she will be there. I believe she'll be doing the stage set in New Orleans. So we're talking high theater, high ritual theater, where everybody is watching. One of the most watched events in the world in Voodoo Central, New Orleans, Louisiana. All right, so that's it. The train is pulling into the station. Today's show has come to a graceful and, I think, well-timed halt. I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll be navigating the astrological matrix. And on Friday, cross your fingers. Cross your fingers. I'm working on a guest, and somebody that I've been following for a long time, whose work I really respect. And if we can get him on the air on Friday, he's going to share with us some solutions about the economy and the political structure of the world, even, perhaps. That's Friday. If not this Friday, it will be a Friday in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But cross your fingers for this Friday, because I think it would be extremely timely. All right, you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open what's possible. Once again, big thanks to Meadow Linn for coming on the show and talking about the Mystic Cookbook. And I'll see everybody on Wednesday. Take good care. Adios.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.